Grouchy Gamer blog post, 1:07 a.m., February 13th. Sorry it's been a couple of days. I normally do like to post once a day, but I needed some space. That last post seems to have set off something pretty vitriolic in the comments. A lot of you are calling me a wuss for what amounts to less than graphic depictions of zombies and little message snippets. Some of you are criticizing me for throwing and randomly digging up all of the meaningless cutscenes. Others say that's been their favorite part so far. A lot of you are also saying that this is just an analog horror project. To those of you, I would ask you to look up what analog horror is. It's not just a buzzword for any online ARG. Not that this is one, anyway. The general consensus seems to be that you do want more of this, though, and you want me to get deeper into the game, beyond just the beginning areas. I decided I should just face it and admit I was being irrational the past couple of days. I only made it so far into the game before I started to question that decision. My pathing was rusty for not having played the game in a couple of days, and I got into a few extra encounters than I needed to. I found myself defeated at the hands of a level 2 infected in the second lab. There was a unique game over message, different than the one I had documented last time. From now on, though, I'm done calling out every single one of them. With my pathing rememorized, I was able to make it to the forbidden boss, get the upgraded drill and medkits, and just bash my way through it. Notably, the game cares very little when you get to a new area or are victorious over a boss, as it just disappeared off the overworld. It took me a few minutes to even figure out what I was supposed to be doing from there. Eventually, I stepped into the space that the forbidden boss had occupied, the chamber that it would drag me into if I lost. To my surprise, it opened up a new section of the map called Hidden Tunnel. As a refresher, every time that I move, there's a second cooldown before I can move again. The enemy sprites in the overworld have the same limitation but can execute it frame perfectly. All this to say, encounters up to this point have been unavoidable to some extent, and if I make mistakes, it becomes nearly insurmountable. Hidden Tunnel made this even worse because it had an alternating 2-second rhythm to it. For the first 2 seconds, everything on the map was visible. For the next 2, everything would go dark. So I was tasked with this labyrinthian tunnel. Every 2 of my 4 steps, I was reliant on what I remembered of the layout from 2 seconds ago. Of course, the enemy sprites that littered this section seemed completely unimpeded by the absence of light, and simply continued to hone in on my location. Fortunately, they were mostly level 1 infected, who at this point were easily dispatched by my fully upgraded drill. Each one of them reliably got a hit on me, though, which meant every encounter was a slow but steady letting of my HP. Sprinkled in among these level 1 infected was a stronger enemy called the Tunnel Crawler. Limbs unnaturally stretched like the level 2 infected, this thing seemed to crawl around on the ground, and seemed to have grown 2 mossy vine-like structures on each side of its body that acted like additional limbs. It stared up at the screen with hollow eyes, and down its arms there appeared to be an occasional animation of a glowing drop of green sludge trickling down. I recalled a similar animation on the standard level 2 infected, and the forbidden boss. It seemed like these small animations to the battle sprites indicated the threat level of the encounter, because this hit similarly to the level 2. Maybe just a little less, though. I scraped by this encounter and used my last medkit outside of battle to maximize its use by not using it on a turn and giving the enemy another chance to strike. It was in this quick bout of menuing that something else made me groan. The enemies did not pause when I was in the menu. Their sprites continued to move about on the overworld as usual. I will say if there's nothing else I can praise this game for, I can praise it for being absolutely brutal. With that, I went back to moving and made my next major discovery. The tunnel had 2 types of traversable tiles. One that looked like a gray slab of concrete, and one that looked like an irradiated green puddle. If an encounter started when I was on a green puddle tile, the background behind the battle sprite would incorporate the glowing mire into the scene. I just chalked that up to the game's obsession with little cosmetic niceties at first. However, I noticed when I encountered a crawler, its sprite being low to the ground seemed almost knee-deep in the sludge when it appeared. The pit in my stomach proved warranted as it started hitting me for double the damage when it was on a land tile. Needless to say, I was not adequately prepared for this and met my second game over of the session. A copiously exhaustive cutscene played. Redacted, the name I had given to my character, based on his name being redacted in the computer archives, had his head repeatedly pushed down into the water by the crawler. This infected creature used its multiple limbs to hold Redacted in place, and as the bizarre waterboarding took place, the fungus began to grow on Redacted's body, and the scene faded to black with the game over text. But not before a message appeared. "Come on back in. The water's just right. Enjoy yourself a little more." I sighed. I found myself in a better mental state because I was now more frustrated than unnerved. It took around 15 minutes to get to the forbidden boss when I executed all of my movements perfectly. I felt like I would now finally have an excuse for why I'm not playing this arduous mess of a game. However, it seems the game privately created a save state for me right after defeating the forbidden boss. Surprisingly, it seems to have left me at full HP, and with the maximum amount of medkits I could have reasonably had before fighting the boss. Mike, the creator of this game, designed it with a mix of brutality with just a small soft spot, just enough to nudge you through the tough sections. Speaking of Mike, he has fully stopped responding to my emails. I sent him a couple angry ones calling this game a trashy horror visual novel. He seemed to have no interest in defending himself or doing any of his weird responses about how I should enjoy the game like no one else can. I went back through the tunnel area, this time armed with the knowledge of the general layout and the intel that the green tiles were not my friends. I made it a lot farther now. I got to a point where I saw a small opening in the wall that served as the boundary on the right side. Not wanting to miss any possible exit, I went in. It looked like a makeshift safe house of the early survivors of this apocalypse. There were some supplies, some much-needed medkits, and an item called the lantern. The description told me that this would illuminate the darkness 3 tiles away from me. Definitely sounds helpful to keep me from bonking into walls during the blackout periods. This little alcove gave me an idea. I poked back into the main tunnel area. I waited a second for the enemy sprites to move, and then I went back in and went out again. As I had hoped, the infected reset their positions. I did this a couple more times just to memorize the layout of the area and chart a path through. However, on my 3rd time going back into the safe house, my character was stuck and frozen. I watched as the shadowy outline of what appeared to be a level 2 infected was cast on the overworld and slowly descended, as if dropping from the ceiling. The screen faded to black and I was met with an encounter. The same gangly body and viney structure of the crawler appeared before me, but hanging upright, suspended in the air by a long, slimy, thick vine that appeared to be attached to the ceiling. Whereas the other crawlers only had 4 protruding, purely fungal extensions, this one seemed to have 6 sprawling, necrotic-looking moss constructs pointed towards the screen. Additionally, it was faint at first, but over just a couple of moments, I could tell there was a slight animation to them. With every few frames, they seemed to stretch, as if getting closer. This creature was called the tunnel spider. I exchanged blows with this creature. I did a paltry amount of damage to it, and it did a significant amount of damage to me. This was bad. A medkit hardly did anything, just barely recovering a little more than the damage it did to me. I paused and pondered my options for a moment. I watched with concern as those tendrils seemed to get closer and closer to the screen. After the incident with the sludge, I no longer had the benefit to think that this might be a purely aesthetic decision. As I considered my options, I was shocked as the creature randomly took an attack while I was hovering over my options. It seemed like it had the same power as the forbidden boss to attack me while I contemplated my turn. I used my last mega medkit to take my HP from nearly nothing to full. There was no way to brute force it through this fight. I had to try something I hadn't tried in a while. Running didn't work on the mobile infected encounters, but maybe this one would be an exception? I hit the run option. It gave me the failure result that I remembered from the past. I took another huge chunk of damage. This time, though, the animation of the creature's viney limbs sprung out. As if my options menu was a physical thing it could touch, it wrapped its slimy tendrils around part of it. The tip of its mossy feelers covered up the run option now. I just sat there, mouth agape. I moved the cursor, but it could not hover over my 4th option anymore. Before I had time to process much of anything, it did another one of its punishing attacks to say I was spending too much time in the menu. Each hit, seemingly corresponding to the creature's limbs getting closer and closer, did progressively more to my HP. This time, it had all it needed to take me from half health to 0. The cutscene showed the limp body of Redacted being pulled up to the ceiling by vines as the tunnel spider wrapped its body, starting with its face. The vines seemed to pulse as they bound Redacted, and small spores from the fungus could be seen collecting on parts of his skin and clothes that were still exposed. It was much slower than any of the previous infections, though. The infected just let him dangle there, rotating from left to right about 30 degrees in range as the moss started to build up on his exterior. At around 40 to 50 seconds, this was the longest cutscene yet, and the slow metamorphosis played out in full. Right before the end, Redacted let out a barely audible gasp and seemed to convulse its body before getting constricted back into motionlessness. The text read, "So many secrets to enjoy. Keep enjoying. Don't stop." Yeah, and that's all I really needed to call it for the day. I started this late and was already beating myself up over the thoughts of that image of Redacted being bound and painstakingly infected, getting burned into my brain while I needed to sleep. I hate this stupid game, and its stupid game over sequences. Don't be surprised if it's the last one you see on it. Grouchy Gamer blog post, 3:35 a.m., February 13th. couldn't sleep, could only wonder about the things I hadn't seen yet. I went back into the game to explore. I started with the crawlers. As it would turn out, there's a unique extension to the cutscene that plays if you drop to 0 HP while not on a green tile. The lanky quadrupedal humanoid drags Redacted by the head over towards a stream of the green sludge before the original cutscene plays out. Well, of course, now I had to know if there were two separate cutscenes for giving up. Well, I knew there were, of course, but I wanted to know what they were. Giving up on a green tile is one that really got under my skin. Redacted is kneeling, as tends to be his position, and the crawler, with its more one human arm limb, slowly feeds the irradiated liquid into Redacted's mouth. The 20-second cutscene plays as Redacted willingly drinks the sludge and his skin starts to green and growth start to emerge. First time getting this one yielded a more unique message. Drink up and enjoy the fruits I created just for you. And no, that was not a mistake. I said the first time because I immediately felt compelled to watch that one again. The cutscene remained the same, but the message was different. Enjoy and relax. Isn't this so much better than the stress of life? In a sense, I agreed. The land tile cutscene played out similarly to the regular defeat. Redacted was led willingly this time to the sludge stream, and knelt down before the previous cutscene played out. I was still not satisfied. I thought it would be possible to get two crawlers in the same encounter, so that was my next goal. The sprites on the overworld, while hardly distinguishable, seemed to be static, as in there was no RNG to determine whether it was a level 1 or a crawler. It was just preset based on the map. The level 1s, more plentiful, found their way to me more often, so I first got a crawler and a level 1 in the encounter. I let the encounter play out to a normal game over, using the futility of the run option to allow them to grind my HP down to nothing, with no risk of me knocking one of them out first on accident. This one was on a sludge tile, which made it quicker. The cutscene showed the crawler dunking Redacted into the fluid, as normal, just with the addition of the level 1 watching. When Redacted emerged and was covered in the fungus, the level 1 seemed to latch onto Redacted, squeezing and embracing Redacted tightly. As this happened, now the level 1 started to metamorphosize, small tendrils starting to grow out of its skin, as if its body was sucking the advanced fungal mutation right out of Redacted. Redacted grew skinny and collapsed into the new crawler's arms. The text read, "Your enjoyment fuels them. The more you enjoy, the more the infection grows." Something about this drove me wild. I was so deeply perturbed by this cutscene, but wanted so badly now to get even more of them. I went back in. I completely botched my routing, forgetting that I was setting up the exact same encounter as last time, rather than a new one. To my surprise, though, it turns out I stumbled into something more wondrous. The level 1 infected that I had just encountered last time was no longer there. The encounter was now 2 crawlers. The game seemingly adopted the change that I saw into lore. I could hardly stand to ponder the implications of what this meant for the game. No time to consider whether this meant every death I had was canon, and if I was leading a clone army of Redacteds through this game to their death. I simply let this battle play out the way it had before, waiting with anticipation for my health to drop to 0. In the cutscene, the 2 crawlers stood around Redacted, slowly their vines outstretched and almost seemed to mummify him. They seemed to enjoy this. They started to cackle, another rare audio cue emerging from this cutscene. It faded to black with the text, "All for you to enjoy. Every secret. Explore every corner. Don't stop looking for greater enjoyment." I nodded up and down to this message. I went back in and triggered the exact same event, but this time immediately selected the give up option. The 2 crawlers gently pushed Redacted's body onto the sludge, leaving only its head above the shallow green fluid. Then they both struck out with 2 vines into the water. Redacted made a sound of a sharp gasp. The 2 seemed to glow more and more. Their fungal bodies gave off spores into the air, as if spreading them into the tunnel. "The spider, next," the text read. "Go there and find greater enjoyment." I hardly cared what was being said to me, and how bizarre I should have found it that it had pre-programmed responses for everything. All I could think about right now was how I needed to see the tunnel spider, and see what was behind that alternate cutscene. I went over to the alcove, did the same thing where I walked in and out of the door several times. As predicted, the encounter started. I hit the give up option. Redacted knelt before the tunnel spider as it descended from the ceiling from its vines. Starting from its feet, its vines wrapped around Redacted and worked their way up its body, moving slowly, emitting spores and small drops of green liquid as they moved. Eventually, Redacted was fully engulfed up to its neck in the growth. The spider grabbed Redacted by its hair and slowly turned its face to look towards the screen. As it did this, the light on my webcam came on, as if it was looking at my face and taking a photo or video. The spider had fully turned Redacted's head towards me, but right before it did, the screen went blurry. A message appeared. "Not yet," it said. "Take a break now. you need to enjoy more of what's inside.